Hello everyone, my name is Nick Kahn. I'm the Executive Officer for Wine Communicators of Australia, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, the latest in a series WCA is running in conjunction with Wine Australia to pass on the results and implications of recent R&D projects and initiatives that Wine Australia has funded. Our focus in this session is primarily on China, which is not uncommon in the wine world today, I guess, as we seek to find a niche in that rapidly growing economy with its expanding interest in good wine. Specifically, we're looking at the potential to attract Chinese tourists to try our wine and take home an inclination to buy, as well as good memories of the experience. Dr. Richard Lee from the University of South Australia was commissioned to undertake a comprehensive study into that very question and is with us today to report on the findings. Also with us is Greg Sterling, who has been involved with a number of Richard's research projects in his role as head of the Jacobs Creek Visitor Centre in the Barossa Valley. Greg was previously part of Pernod Ricard's global marketing team and has wide experience working with the Chinese market and Chinese consumers. He's also chairman of the Ultimate Wineries of Australia, a collaboration of Australia's best wine tourism sites, so the conversation may take us in a number of directions. Before we go on, however, a little housekeeping. Webinars allow you to sit back and listen or to get involved if you wish. If you do feel moved to ask a question or make a comment, there are three ways you can do that, as I set out on the screen now. You can use the comment box, you can tweet, or you can email. The comment box is pretty straightforward if you haven't used it before, simply type and send. WCA's Program Manager, Jen Barwick, as also is with us here in the National Wine Centre, and will moderate your input, reply directly as appropriate, and send as many questions as possible through to us. If we don't get to your question in the next hour, we will be getting back to you later, and we will send all of you a link to access a recording of the session in your own time. And so, with that introduction, let me ask Dr. Richard Lee to get the ball rolling. Richard?
Thank you, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Lee from University of South Australia. First of all, I'd like to thank Wine Australia for funding this project about how to harness inbound tourists for wine export. The project is really to solve a problem. And the problem is this. China is a big market for everyone in the wine industry, and I think it's no exception for the Australian wine market as well. We all know that. This is not the first project that we have done regarding Chinese wine consumers. There are many projects we have done before this, but inevitably, we almost always come to the same conclusion, and that is, if you were to ask Chinese wine consumers about the perception of wine, and wine to them mainly is about red wine, just to clarify, and you ask them, which country's wine, which country of origin's wine would they perceive as of the best quality? Most likely, you get the answer that they would think French wine is rated top. So one of the key issues as far as the Australian wine exporters are concerned is, how do we counter this perception? How do we improve the perceptions of our own country's wine? Surely there might be a small segment of wine enthusiasts, people who are very knowledgeable about wine. Perhaps they can discern the difference across wine, but when it comes to the mass consumers, the majority of the people, the predominant perception is the French wine is number one. So that is one of the key problems that we are trying to tackle. Now, the other one is this. Wine, just like in many countries, are sold through a multi-tier distribution network, and therefore, wine exporters, from the branding itself, they do not have direct access to the consumers. But the promotions, the marketing, and so forth are mainly then done through the various different distribution layers. So the next key question is then, how would you reach out to those consumers directly from the brand? And to make matter worse, we know that China is a very fragmented media landscape. It has a very fragmented media landscape. It's got national newspapers, national television stations, but it also has a lot of regional ones and even city-based ones, and each targeting a different audience, each having their different reach. So now, to be able to effectively reach a mass market over a wide geographical area like China, one would probably have to invest and advertise in lots of different media, and obviously the cost is going to be exorbitant. So that underpins the problem. And therefore, the challenge that we're trying to address is, how can we improve Chinese consumers' perception of Australian wine in the face of all those problems? And one proposition we have that this project specifically addressed is about, why not use Chinese tourists? Now, let's talk about Australia. The Chinese tourists today other than New Zealand, are the largest group of inbound tourists coming into Australia every year. I think last year it's probably about 800,000, growing at double digit, and the forecast by Tourism Australia is that number should reach about 1 million within 2 years. That is a very large number. We have this slide about the research being supported by academic research. Let me just skip this slide, Nick, and just put it in there to stress that the research are supported by some academic findings as well. So back to the topic about the number of tourists coming to Australia. This chart will give you a good perspective about how the numbers are growing. The red line is the absolute numbers, and the blue line is the percentage growth over the previous years. The chart is also showing that not only are the numbers increasing, they are also a very big spenders, and they also spend many nights in Australia. Now, so there obviously is a very key advantage to target this group of tourists. Firstly, majority of these tourists are first-time visitors, and chances are the trend will remain the same for years to come. Just about 2 weeks ago, I was at a seminar about Australian tourism, and as I understand, despite the massive numbers of people coming into Australia from China, it merely represents about 3% of their total outbound tourists from China. So in other words, if we're able to grow as a country net numbers upwards, we expect a much higher number of inbound tourists. Now, so the beauty as far as this project is concerned is with this inbound tourists coming into Australia in our soil, it allows us a direct access method to Chinese consumers. Put it in a different way, to address and to target them directly in China has got multiple problems, as I've discussed just now. For example, such as the middleman mediating between the consumers and the wine brand, number one. Secondly, is that to advertise directly in China would be expensive because of the fragmented market. So being able to reach out to the Chinese tourists while they are here will really give us a new and a direct way to address them. Okay, and the very fact that since they come from different parts and different regions in China, yet congregate in a few prime tourist locations, for example Sydney, for example Barossa Valley, it means to say that at a single geographical location, wine brands will be able to target Chinese consumers who come from different parts of China, and therefore when they go back, hopefully they could serve as word-of-mouth ambassadors in their respective regions for our wine brands. Okay. Now, so the target is, if we can influence them while they are here, how can we change their perception of Australian wine brands? How can we increase their propensity to buy Australian wine brands the next time they want to buy wine? And very importantly, given the collectivistic culture of China, we would think that word of mouth is a very important mode of communication. And being able to influence them while they are here, hopefully they will help us to spread positive word of mouth back home when they return. Okay. Now, how this project and how this idea would apply, I think it applies to wineries of different sizes. First of all, it can benefit the smaller brands, especially the brands that lack the financial ability to advertise directly in China, or to be able to negotiate different terms with the distribution network in China for different sorts of promotion. Now, this will allow them direct access to Chinese consumers in a very much cost-efficient way. As I would show later, the project will particularly suit wineries with cellar doors, with their own restaurants, where it is possible for the Chinese tourists to have closer encounter with the wine brand itself. Okay, and very importantly, it also suits brands that tie wine and winery visit not just merely about wine tasting, but as a form of tourism experience. Again, when I talk about the project findings, I think this point will become more apparent.
And that's probably a good time to bring Greg in, because while Jacob's Creek could never be described as one of our smaller brands, it certainly ticks the other two boxes on the screen about brands with cellar doors and restaurants and brands very much tied to tourism. So before Richard outlines more the specifics of the research he did, I'd just like Greg to talk a little bit through what Jacob's Creek's experience is, being up to date and now in dealing with Chinese tourists.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Afternoon, everybody. I'm going to just sort of open up on just, I suppose, a few key things from the point of view of where we're at with China, and then there's a slide later on about some of the things that we have actually specifically done. I think just to build on Richard's points, outbound Chinese tourism is a significant opportunity and well recognised. And I think importantly also tourism within Australia is seen again as a really important growth opportunity over the next sort of few years. I mean, we've been very lucky with Jacobs Creek to build our awareness over the years in China, and that certainly has helped us benefit from making Chinese visitors curious to actually come to Jacobs Creek. But I also would say that from a food and wine perspective, initiatives like Restaurant Australia and again, I suppose, sort of growing awareness in general of Australia's sort of food and wine offer certainly is growing. And I think one of the things that's important to recognise is that for Chinese outbound visitors, food and wine experiences are really high on the list in terms of what they want to experience when they go into a market. And I think, as we all know, in Australia, we have an amazing offer in terms of our food and wine across the country and a diversity of wonderful experiences. So for us, we have had a tourism strategy, as Nick said, based around attracting visitors to our site, and China has been a real focus. Chinese guests now represent about 10% of our total visitation, and that's again sort of growing every year. The majority of these, interestingly, are what we call FIT, or basically independent travellers. So they're travelling under their own steam and organising their own travel. They're not part of a big tour group travelling in, I suppose, organised, sort of structured itinerary. So
that might surprise some people, Greg. I think that we have a bit of a perception that the Chinese tourists are a bit like the Japanese tourists that we tried to attract in the 80s. It was all about coming in groups and the safety of numbers.
Yeah, I think certainly from what we've seen at our site, and I think Richard might be able to add to that in terms of other sites around Australia, but certainly from what we've seen, it's small groups. Definitely coming in for experience-based tourism. So they're looking for lunch, they're looking for opportunities to learn about wine, and I think to be engaged. And I think South Australia, though, has Richard talked about 840,000 inbound Chinese. I mean, South Australia has about 30,000, so it's a much smaller share, and the proportion of visitors that we get into South Australia is again very much skewed to that independent traveller, as distinct from the more structured sort of tour groups, which tend to sort of hit the eastern states a little bit more.
I should also add that on top of that $850,000, we should not ignore the mileage that international Chinese students can give to this project as well. And I think currently there are in excess of 300 Chinese international students who are here. Although they are not really tourists per se, but at the end of the day, majority of them will go back. So that will still be a segment that we can influence too.
Yeah, and I think that's again what I mean, as Richard said. I mean, one of the key things is that why are they travelling? Certainly, holiday is an important factor, but I mean, as you say, visiting friends and relatives, which I've sort of abbreviated as VFR there. And that student factor is a really important one. I think one of the surprising things is the length of stay. Richard, I'm not sure if you're going to cover that, but certainly the length of stay I think is surprising, and it's roughly around sort of 2 weeks. So that I think the more work we've done, the more sort of, I suppose, data we've got, but also anecdotally seems to back that up as well. So I think that was quite surprising when we sort of really understood that a bit deeper.
A comment, Greg, from Leanne de Bortoli, a name you would know well, I'm sure.
Oh, Leanne.
Have mainly self-drive Chinese visitors, but they do still come in larger family groups of 20 or so.
Yeah, that's what we see, and that's what we were very curious to find out more about, which is why we've undertaken some projects to understand how booking occurs. Is there one geographic region in China that it's that we're getting visitors from. So we undertook some work to understand that a little bit more deeply. And I think one of our future aims would be to understand what more we can actually do to enhance the experience now that we've actually started to build a bit of an understanding about who we're seeing.
And have any trends come from that research? Have you noticed in particular that there are differences maybe between different regions or between the key cities of Beijing and Shanghai and other areas?
No, I think again, I mean, what has been pleasing has been that it's been a very even split. I mean, given, I suppose, China's a pretty complex, I think again, Richard, as you said, a geographic and demographic market. So, I mean, there's many varied cities in terms of, again, from tier 1 to tier 3, and also, but I mean, I think on the whole, it's a pretty even as we can get split, but there's no one thing that sort of stood out in terms of it's from one city or the other.
Perhaps every once in a while you may get some anomalies, such as during Chinese New Year, you may have some additional charter flights that come in from a particular city. Then you might see a spike of visitors from a specific city, but only because of the chartered flight during certain occasion. Otherwise, like Greg said, it's very much more evenly distributed.
Yeah. 10% is a fairly high percentage.
Yep.
At a place like Jacobs Creek, it's a large physical number of people.
Yep.
Do you therefore have your staff trained to approach the Chinese visitors in a certain way? I don't mean that you have a Chinese and a non-Chinese approach, but are there certain aspects that you're aware of that you want them to do, perhaps initially when people come through the door, or that to train them to deal with large groups of 20 that would be different to, say, 20 visiting Australians?
No, I think that getting back to what makes our sort of food and wine experiences so amazing in all of our regions is our people. And that visitors, no matter where they're from, are looking for, to engage with the staff in terms of tasting wine or learning more about the food. So I think we've basically taken the core premise of maintaining our experience, but making it easier for our Chinese guests to engage in. So, and to do that, we have done some cultural awareness training. And we need to keep going with that, and also some other things I'll talk to, I think, in the slide later on, in terms of some of the other specific things that we've done to try and make sure that the experience is able to be a little easier for people to engage in. Okay, so I suppose just to summarise, we definitely see it as a great opportunity to build brand ambassadors, to give people and our Chinese guests a great opportunity to learn more about the wine, to understand more about the region, and to when they get there, we also find they very heavily use social media, so they can spread the word through their social networks, which are quite extensive through things like Weibo and WeChat, which are definitely worth having a look at. Strongly recommend anyone sort of has a look at that as part of their social media strategy. And then hopefully buying the wine upon return in mainland China.
And we might talk a little bit more about the social media side of things a bit later. So now let's go back to Richard to finish the story of his research.
Okay, so I'm going to share with you right now a bit more details about what we did for the project and the findings from it. Now, before that, back to Nick's point about whether are we looking at free independent travelers or are they the mass package travelers? What we did is that we actually targeted both groups in this project, and we do not find much of a difference between the two in terms of their perception and so forth, but we'll come to that later. You can see on this slide that in order to test our proposition about the effectiveness of using inbound tourists, we did the market survey at various locations. One of them is a winery in South Australia. Essentially, the people who visit the wineries are the free and independent traveller. Secondly, we did it at Sydney Fish Market. And by far, the majority of the people that visit Sydney Fish Market, the Chinese tourists who visit Sydney Fish Market, the vast majority are from the package tours. The third is that we surveyed at two different restaurants, both in Cairns. One is an Australian restaurant, mainly favoured by the independent traveller. Another one is a Chinese restaurant that catered to the package bus tours who come and have their meal and then move on to the next itinerary very quickly. So these are the different locations that we did the market survey. Now, in each and every of those locations, we kind of measured just 3 key things. There are many more things that we measured, but for the sake of this seminar, I'm just going to mention these 3. We asked about their perception of Australian wine. We asked about their perception of Australian seafood, and there's a reason we do that. And finally, we asked about their perception of Australia as a tourist destination. So these are the key things that you want to bear in mind. Now, we found some very fascinating results that support our hypothesis that the inbound tourist is definitely an effective group to target, and targeting them can be an effective strategy to help export. Now, first of all, a thing that we found is the more positive the tourists are about Australia as a tour destination, they tend to favor and evaluate our wine more positively. So if you think about it, what we are saying here is that if they were to have a good tourism experience, they will rate our product better. And that is very important because the Tourism Australia Exit Survey shows that the vast majority, if not virtually everybody, every Chinese tourist who visit Australia, they rated their tourism experience very, very highly. And then again, what is there not to like about Australia? We have good tourism product, we have good tourism services, infrastructure, natural landscape, and so forth. So it's very easy for the tourists to have a very good experience on the tourism side. If we can do that, and if we can just simply make sure that while they are here, expose them to, get them to have encounters with our wine brand, then automatically their positive tourism experience will then rub off onto the brand experience, to the wine brand. And that would then be a very easy win for us by leveraging off the tourism experience. So that's exactly the core underlying approach of this strategy. Now, the findings from the project also reveal a different aspect. Remember that we tested in restaurant, we tested in Sydney Fish Market, we tested in a winery, and we found that while the strategy generally worked, and that is a tourism experience will rub off onto brand perception, but that strategy is more effective in locations where wine is expected. For example, in vineyards, in wineries, in restaurants, you expect to be encountering wine. In those locations, the ability for the tourism experience to influence the brand perception is greater. Conversely then, is that for Sydney Fish Market, we found that their perception of seafood is more influenced by the tourism experience than the wine perception, because Sydney Fish Market is probably more congruent with seafood than more congruent with a wine product. Okay.
We might throw back to Greg now on his, I guess, a bit more about the approach that the Jacobs Creek Visitor Centre is taking to be China ready.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Look, these are just some points that, in terms of sharing our experience. I mean, we've taken a long-term approach, I suppose, to target China. I mean, one of the keys has been to get to the key Chinese travel agent and get what we call our product into, I suppose, their hands, so that people, when they go into speak to an agent in China, actually can find more about where to go if they're after a food and wine experience. So we've visited the market over 5 years to talk directly to agents. I think we've supported industry initiatives like trade shows such as Australian Tourism Exchange and Corroboree. And I think we've also worked collaboratively with industry such as initiatives like Ultimate Wineries, which has helped us represent Jacobs Creek more with a collaboration of other wineries to get again into that distribution channel. We've supported heavily groups that come to South Australia through, I suppose, Industry for Mills. And I think we've seen a big increase in the number of visitors over the last couple of years that use agents to actually book their trip to the visitor centre over Chinese New Year, which is a key period of Chinese visitation. So it's taken time, and it's going to take a lot more time. And I think our approach is certainly to keep chipping away at it, but take a long-term view. And then behind that, Nick, as you mentioned, is making that experience engaging and easy, but still having what we call a sort of Jacobs Creek brand experience. So we have had some Mandarin. We do have some Mandarin-speaking staff, which enables us to do specific tastings or tours in Mandarin. It also enables them to go and sort of again talk to people in the restaurant and talk about the food and the wine. We've got a lot of signage that we've put in, not just inside, but also in our grounds, which we're lucky to have pretty extensive sort of grounds where we have both our story in English and then also Mandarin. You know, simple things like even just, I suppose, identifying different types of bird life and wildlife to make it again easy. Things like share platters are available. We've now have an online bookable system for our experiences, so people can actually book directly online. Free Wi-Fi is really important again for that social media component, and that's really, really important to leverage that, I suppose, photos being uploaded and sharing with friends.
An interesting issue raised in the chat about wine terminology, and I know this is some work that UniSA has been looking at specifically about how the Chinese understand different wine terms. Have you made an effort to change your terminology or to teach your staff to explain wine in a way that the Chinese will understand?
I think what we have done is drawn on our Mandarin-speaking staff, and one of our staff is actually a qualified sort of winemaker. So, I mean, she is able to then look at, I suppose, wine terms when she and what we've got, and then so we'll run a lot of things past her in terms of menu development and also descriptors as well, so that we can try and get that right. But I think it's a really interesting area, and I think there's a lot more work to actually to do on that.
So would she ever come back to you and say, look, I'm sorry, these Chinese guests wouldn't know what a strawberry is, and that you need to explain this in a different way?
Yeah, definitely. Yep. I think, I mean, that's again also one of the things that we collaborate, I suppose, strongly internally also with our winemaking team and drawing on their experience when they go into market, and also from our team in China as well. Mm-hmm. I think it's a good point. I think there's a lot more that we can understand about that.
Now, are there things that the Chinese visitors, particularly those coming in large groups, are looking for when they first walk through the door? Are they different in their expectations or how they want to be greeted than other groups?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. We were discussing before we started just a couple of things, and I think we're still learning some of the nuances. And as I said, I think what we really are trying to do now is understand more about where we go in terms of going forward. But I think some of the things are quite simple in terms of making sure people are greeted. I mean, we're a big site, so where do people go? And some of those things we know. But I think we sometimes take it for granted that other people know, so it's assumed knowledge. So I think sometimes paring it back and actually talking to people about their experience has given us a lot of clues about what we should do, from signage and where staff should be positioned, and some pretty simple stuff that's not rocket science, but it's things you tend to not think about unless you're actually talking to people. And I think that's a big part of why we're really keen to keep working very closely on the market and with people like Richard, who we've done some joint projects with, to understand better about what we're doing and how we can improve.
Do you like to give Chinese visitors takeaway paraphernalia? I don't mean free wine. I'm sure they wouldn't mind. Written material. Yeah, look, I mean, we have some, I suppose, things in terms of to enable people to get around a little bit more. But I think that, again, I mean, it's simple things like menus being translated and, tasting notes to be able to just help what we actually have. So I think, and I think, again, I mean, most things like souvenirs tend to be wine. They're looking for wine, tend to be looking for wine-specific stuff, and also some of the regional sort of food type of offer as well. Do you find groups coming to Jacobs Creek, which is, as you say, a large centre, a well-known brand, are they looking to and interested in seeing other wineries around the Barossa Valley, or are they essentially seeing this as their wine experience, this is what they've come to do, and this may be, depending on your answer, it may be good or bad news for other wineries?
Oh no, I think look, it's definitely the more people that we get into the region actually disperse into other wineries, and not only the wineries but also the restaurants. they also then use the hotels, then they also, look for shops. So I think it actually is why tourism is such a really great opportunity for the future, because it provides a lot of opportunities in regions to actually grow. When people travel, they are generally buying lunch and dinner and looking to get around the place. So I think it benefits the regions really strongly, and I think they obviously that's why working collaboratively is really important to extend the offer and to let people know that there is more than one or two wineries and that you can do a lot more things in region, because I think again we assume knowledge that people know the geography, and I think we found again that a lot of Chinese operators won't know where specifically South Australia is. So again, it has been a lot of base level education in terms of no, we're not close to Sydney, and you've got to fly, and no, you can't drive in 2 hours. So there's a lot of work that we've done to understand that, and there's a lot more work I suppose to do to from a South Australian perspective, to build awareness of what we actually have in the state and in our regions.
Yeah. There's a bit of conversation going online about terminology, so we've obviously hit on an important issue there. We might have to do another webinar on that later. There's also a bit of conversation going on about letting them know where they can buy wine. We might come back to that in a minute, because our final section is going to look at what happens once the Chinese tourists go home. One other question I'd like to ask you though is, do you find that the Chinese visitors are particularly interested in the winemaking process, or are they essentially interested in the product and the vineyards and the picturesque setting?
Sorry, Richard, I don't know if you want to answer that.
If I could just add on to that, from what we found out, most of the Chinese tourists, when they come to Barossa Valley and specifically to vineyards, they are really not looking for that wine tasting experience. I did a focus group recently, and I had this remark made, which is still very fresh in my mind. And they're saying that if it's purely about wine tasting, which I want to, I wouldn't have bothered to make that 2-hour journey to Barossa Valley. I could have done it somewhere within the city, if it's just merely about wine tasting. So to them, it's the entire tourism experience. So they do not visit a vineyard most of the time, not because of the wine per se, but to them, it's the entire tourism experience. Right? So we would have to approach this very much as a tourism experience, and how through the tourism experience we can influence their wine perception, as opposed to thinking that we can influence their wine perception purely by educating them about wine from a quality perspective and so forth. This is what I think the research is pointing towards.
Greg, we touched briefly on social media before. Perhaps we can touch on it again before we go back to the final part of the research. Again, I think we have a perception that the Chinese tourists are very into social media. They're using Facebook or Twitter or the Chinese equivalent of them. Do you find that's the case? And can you ever get a sense of essentially what they're talking about when they go on social media? And is it of much value to you as Jacobs Creek, or are they simply saying having a great time in a South Aussie winery?
I think that we're still learning. I think that I suppose in terms of, to answer your question, I mean, we still get a lot of feedback about we want more photo points. So I think that gives you a bit of a clue in terms of photos, and being able to upload that quickly and share that with friends is important.
Do you need a koala?
That'd be a bonus.
Do you want to come up? You can come up and hold a little toy one, Nick, maybe behind the sign. I think that what we do have in all of our regions is incredibly beautiful scenery, an amazing environment. So, I think photos in the vines, those little experiences again that we tend to take for granted a little bit, are things that people internationally, not just China, absolutely love. Amazing sunsets, all the sort of, the Barossa, the views over the ranges. I mean, the sun sort of, casting shadows over the hills, all those sorts of things. I mean, I think are important along with but providing the opportunity to actually do it.
So and making it easy for them to do it, to actually say to them, hey, would you like a photo in the wines? Feel free to take a couple of glasses out with you and pose with them.
Yeah, I think so. I think I think that's
I'm just reading the note on the screen that everyone here is laughing about. Our kangaroos are popular with the tourists, but not with the vineyard managers. You could read that both ways. Does that mean your vineyard manager is not popular with the tourists?
But I think again, I mean, even said for we definitely are learning all the time about what more we need to do to make it easy, and photo points is one that comes up all the time. And just when we think we've got a couple, but it's more. So I think that's something again that is definitely a social media sort of component in that those photos are uploaded and sent out.
I mean, we've laughed about koalas and kangaroos, but in a sense that's putting vineyard in a quintessentially Australian setting, isn't it, Richard? You're nodding.
Correct.
Yeah,
absolutely that. And once again, is that if we can improve that tourism experience at a vineyard, it will help improve the experience and the perception of the wine brand.
Richard, perhaps did you want to go back to your final section of the research, and then we might talk a little bit more, Greg, about how he's working to extend things into the future.
Okay. Now, so this last bit, we sort of extended the initial project, and we did a couple of different things in order to further shed light on the findings. The first we did is this. We know that if tourists were to visit a vineyard in Australia, they would have an improved perception of the wine brand. So what we did is that we then did another survey, in this time an Australian cellar door, but operating in China, in the city of Chengdu. So you think about it, this cellar door in Chengdu is an Australian brand. The visit to a vineyard in Barossa Valley is an Australian brand as well. Therefore, the only difference is, on the one hand, you have the tourism experience for people who visited Barossa Valley, and the other consumer cohort who went to the cellar door in Chengdu has never been to Australia. We screened it out such that only people who have not been to Australia were asked to do the survey in Chengdu. Now, the results, again, very clearly point to the importance of the tourism factor. The ones who were at Barossa Valley, they have a more positive perception of our wine brand than the one in the Chengdu cellar door. Both in Australian brand. The difference, again, is one has got a tourism effect, the other one doesn't. So that was the first extension we did. Now, the second extension then is we tracked the Chinese tourists longitudinally over 2 6-month periods. When they were here, we collected their emails. 6 to 7 months later, we emailed them again, and then another 6 to 7 months later, we emailed them again. And as usual with longitudinal research, you expect there will be a drop in response rate. So from 557, it dropped to 137 and dropped to 66, which is still pretty reasonable when it comes to response rate for longitudinal research. Now, and this graph illustrates roughly what we found. It seems that while they were here in Australia and we asked them about their perceptions of wine brand and their propensity to purchase, those perceptions are enhanced. They are pretty high. But over time, over that 2 6-month period, it gradually decayed to a level which is lower than their initial perception when they were in Australia. Right? So, well, this could be viewed as bad news, but I think it could also be viewed in a very opportunistic manner. First of all, as far as these tourists are concerned, once they have gone back, there weren't any follow-up marketing to continue to target them. So a key question really is that we know it's effective to influence their initial perception when they're in Australia, but in what way and using what mechanism will we able to continue to influence them when they have returned to China? And hopefully the trend that you see on the graphs on the screen would either be turning upwards or at least would have the decay slowed and retarded. Okay, so that would be a very key important thing that we want to consider. Secondly is that what we do not know is, even if there were a decay, even if the perceptions were to decay, to what extent will there be a sustainable long-term level that bottoms out? And that bottom-out level could still be higher compared to people who have not been to Australia as a tourist. So those are the two things that we are not very clear at this present moment, but I'm sure future research will be able to tease out more information about these two issues. But having said so and therefore to conclude, I think what we're saying from this project is definitely it's worthwhile targeting Chinese tourists because they would help improve the brand perception and therefore to enhance our export competitiveness. That's one thing. That's one of the takeaway. Secondly is that as we tested them in different locations, it is quite clear that the strategy works better in congruent locations where you expect wine to be present, such as in a vineyard, such as in restaurant, as opposed to when wine are not necessarily expected to be present, such as say in Sydney Fish Market or even say outside the Opera House. So that to some extent would govern how and where the tactic can be executed. The third important point really is there's a need to follow up on the initial positive perception. In other words, it's not just a one-time thing and then we expect that positive perception to just linger on. We would have to find ways to counter that decay, and I think that can be done.
Greg, in a minute I'll get you to comment on the future and how possibly we try to deal with that. Before we do, can I just step back? There's a question for you, Richard, though, Greg, you might like to answer it too. The concept of charging for tasting is one that wineries regularly have. In the context of Chinese visitors, yes or no?
I don't think it's a yes or no question. It's probably another webinar. Look, I think that I don't think that's a China-specific question. I mean, I think it's a broader question, in all honesty, and something that will vary by winery and by offer. I think there's a lot more to probably. Look, I mean, I think it's quite a bigger conversation around that. So, yeah, I'm not sure I can answer that yes or no, Nick, to be honest. Okay. I don't. Probably doesn't make you too happy, but.
No, that's all right. I didn't ask the question. No, I think you're right. It is a valid question that wineries wrestle with constantly, and there's clearly pros and cons in both directions.
And there's so many different ways to do it, and I think probably again, trying to package up our experiences and to ensure people have the opportunity to sort of purchase them, globally. Book them online, I think, is a great way to go as well. And saying that, obviously, sometimes the right way to go is also to charge at the cellar door for tasting. So I think that there's a lot of different ways to look at it.
Richard, have you picked up anything from your discussions with Chinese consumers?
Not at all, but I just wanted to add that I think the cellar door should look at the wine tasting very much as a marketing expense. Now, for example, if we know that this strategy is effective, then the issue is that instead of advertising one time in China, that it costs you X dollars, to the extent that the X dollars would be equivalent to X bottles of wine, and perhaps that bottles of wine served may be more effective as a marketing tactic than having that single advertisement in China. So it could be looked at it from that perspective, and if we do so, then I would tend to support that for the generic mass consumers that we're trying to influence, it might be a better idea not to charge than to charge. Perhaps you might have some high-end consumers who are after certain, bottles and vintage of wine. Now that's a different issue altogether.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Greg, can I ask you therefore about this? The last point Richard has raised in his research about how do you keep front of mind or even second in mind once they get back to China. That's clearly an issue you would have grappled with at Jacobs Creek.
Yeah, I think. I think that. For Jacobs Creek again, being a larger brand, I mean, we have a marketing sort of team working on a program specifically in China, and I suppose like a lot of marketing, it does also come down to distribution and increased distribution over time. So I think that also goes hand in hand with the tourism experiences, is generating that awareness that we're starting to build for food and wine into actually getting people into the country, and to get, I suppose, value from that as well.
Do you ask Chinese visitors in particular whether they would like to leave an email address or if they're interested in having regular contact?
No, we haven't specifically done that at this point. But again, I mean, all those things again will vary from site to site because I mean, most wineries have different, I suppose, objectives and different sort of distribution networks as well.
Could I add that I think the digital technology holds a lot of promise in this area. When they go back, for example, surely there'll be other mechanisms to reach them, including as simple as email contact. But chances are, if we were to think creatively, the likes of social media, Weibo and so forth, would hold considerable promise to follow up with this return Chinese tourists. And then again, the same concept can apply to other tourist groups as well.
Leanne de Bortley put a question in the chat box earlier. I think it's now disappeared. That they had a system, and I think I've got this right, Leanne, whereby you could taste wine at their winery and then arrange to have it distributed to you once you got back to China. You could say that was great. Yes, I'd love some dropped off at my apartment in Shanghai. Thank you.
Yep, it's it's fantastic.
Is that something you do?
No, not at the moment, but I'm
taking notes, Leanne.
Yeah, I'm writing that down. Thank you. Like I think those sorts of things again vary from, but I mean it's a great way to obviously capitalise on that visitor, visitation. I think that's a great idea.
Right.
And I guess it makes it easier to go back to them and try and remind them about your wines if you know that they already know how they can get them. It's, I can imagine that I'm sitting there in China, I get an email telling me about something that's great, and I say, well, you haven't told me how I can buy it here in Shanghai, so it's all a bit pointless.
Yeah. Could I just very quickly address one of the questions on the board, Nick? Okay, the question from Joanne Winterbottom was, so what sort of follow-up is effective? I think that's exactly a question that we're grappling with right now, as in we have ideas on what could be done, and not necessarily using the digital platform, although digital would be one key way to go. And I think going forward, which is exactly what we're trying to bring this research into, to test the different ways and to see which one are more effective. And if by effective, I mean how do we continue to sustain that positive perception, and hopefully how can we continue to make sure that they have a higher propensity to buy Australian wine.
Comment somewhere, how about web chat QR code linked to your Chinese website or distributor? I think we're seriously getting into the modern technology now, aren't we? But I guess this is the kind of stuff we have to start thinking about.
Correct. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, as technology keeps giving us, wonderful opportunities, and that coincided with the growth that we all hope to see. I think it's a really exciting future.
Final comment, gentlemen. China, something smaller wineries should be looking to?
Well, all the more for the smaller vineyard, the tourism strategy is particularly effective and potent, especially from a cost effectiveness point of view. You think about the inability of the smaller vineyard to directly market themselves in China, and also the multi-layer distribution structure that disallows them to have direct access to Chinese consumers, then all the more that the tourism strategy is something that they can think about and work around.
Greg?
Yeah, look, I think we have, as I said, amazing tourism product for wine and food in Australia. I think there's huge interest in China. So I think there's a great opportunity for us to capitalise on that, and huge opportunities for the future. Saying that, I think that it's also important to look at the premium sector and as distinct from, again, making it a volume game. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a great opportunity for all of us as we go forward. So I think it'll be interesting to see how where we are in another 12 to 24 months.
Exactly that, yes.
One comment coming through, I'm just reading. I sometimes feel we're at a disadvantage being small and boutique, as the Chinese feel that big is good. We're tiny. Advice, please.
Yeah, look, I think that every winery, be it big or small, has unique experiences and a unique story. So I think it's about looking at what is unique in terms of story and your experience. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great place to start, because I think once you have that, inevitably it's kind of right in front of us. And again, we tend to take advantage. Where we talked about like the views and photo shots. I mean, some of those things are right before us. We tend to sort of take it for granted because we're immersed in it every day. Mm-hmm. But to international tourists, they're just gold. And also, again, that human sort of contact in terms of talking to locals is also, I don't think, can be underestimated. So I actually think, small wineries have got a lot of advantages also over bigger companies in terms of talking to the winemaker and the owner and those types of things as well. So I think it's... I
guess the question is how they get on the agenda of the kind of agents that someone might book through in China. Someone's just asked the question, I'm not sure whether we can answer it now. Who are the big inbound operators? Are there obvious people you try and connect with as a small winery?
Yeah, I think it's probably worth then talking to the state tourism bodies or your regional tourism about just the market in general and what can be done, because I mean it's certainly with China it's complex because it's a big country and there's lots of distribution channels. So I think starting with the regional tourism guys and then also where you can with the state tourism guys, and then there's also briefings that happen regionally through different tourism bodies, I think is a really great place to start to build an understanding of that.
I guess it's a matter, I was about to say it's a good comment, but I realise it's from Jen, so I'll pull that back. But linking in with 2 or 3 other small wineries, I guess it's about putting together a package that has sufficient size and appeal that it starts to register on the radar of the people who are organising inbound tours. I mean, they want refreshed products, and if they can suddenly say, look, instead of X that we've always been doing, we've got a great new exciting office in the Yarra where 5 wineries are working together, and all the places they go to will have Chinese menus.
I agree, and I think there's also great collaborations, and it can be with the if you don't have a restaurant, collaborate with a local restaurant. So I think there's lots of opportunities to actually pull together quite a number of things and come up with something that is going to be again of interest. So and I think look at it, some of that will take time because, as I said, even again, we're a large brand. I mean, we sometimes are assumed to be on the East Coast, and that's not the case. So there's still a lot of work to do in that.
Again, some interesting comments coming through backing up what you were just saying, Greg, about some values of small winery. Sharon makes a comment also, the Chinese like the fact you only make a small amount of wine and it's a boutique winery, having photos with the winemakers in a small place.
Yeah, so there's all those sorts of things that I think, as I said, we know they're there, but it's telling it as well and getting it out there.
Yeah. Just wanted to add on to Greg's point and Jen's comment as well that collaborating with the restaurant is definitely a good idea. Another takeaway which I had from the focus group recently is when I asked them, so when you go back, would you buy Australian wine and wine? And I think there's a unanimous response that the reason why they would buy Australian wine when they go back is it allows them to reminisce on their tourism experience when they're back here. And especially when a small vineyard, if you would have problem attracting the tourists to your vineyard, especially from a tourism perspective, the other way is to reach out to them in places like restaurants, where when they dine, they may get exposed to your brand, and that again will make that wine brand connection, the tourism brand connection.
We're getting so much chat online makes the point that this is an issue we really need to discuss, which is a very good time for me to remind you that all WCA members can sign up to our Facebook community, which is only for WCA members to discuss these very same issues. So we'd love you to do so. I suspect Jen might walk straight out of this room and throw something online for you to discuss. The Facebook community is really there for you to swap these kind of ideas. We've had great input from bigger companies such as Leanne, Greg at the other end. We've got some small people coming with some ideas. Let's swap some ideas via our Facebook community about how we can do this and how we can start working together, because that's the idea of it. We're just about out of time. Thank you to both Richard and Greg for your input today. Most interesting. Thank you to Wine Australia for funding the research. We love you always. Just before we go, can I just mention our next webinar, which actually comes up in just 2 weeks from today. We're forcing 2 into August. This one is looking at a very specific kind of social media, how to leverage Instagram to grow wine brand awareness. Many of you would know Trish Barry, who's going to be presenting for us. Free to WCA members as always. I think registration's open now, Jen? It is indeed. So that's just 2 weeks from now. We'll be talking Instagram, which may well be a way to get into the Chinese market. Let's run our webinars together. So thank you all for joining us. There's a web address on there for the Wine Australia research site where you can access Richard's findings now. I'm looking at Anne, who's opposite me. Yes, the full report from Richard's research is there. And of course, you can go to the Wine Communicators site to find out more about our webinars and everything else we do. So it's been great to be with you. Hope there was some value in this webinar for you, and look forward to joining you in 2 weeks' time. See you later.